Yes, my friends, we are back today at the Hard Rock Casino in Rockford, Illinois, just like we were the last vlog. Let me explain. See, I had to drive up to Chicago to pick up this little angel so we can do some traveling together, and I stopped in and filmed all this and then told her how cool it was, and she wanted to see it too. So we decided, since we're in Rockford, the home of Cheap Trick, we're gonna do some Cheap Trick spots here today. So let's go do it. Daze with Jordan the Lion and the beautiful Katie. It begins right now. So it's interesting how Rick NIELSEN, he's kind of the man behind Cheap Trick, I would say, the brains. He writes a lot of the songs, most of the songs. Now, he said that his family, he was actually born in Elmhurst, Illinois, but during the Korean War, his father was a singer, and so they moved around to the islands for a while and then ended up living in Roswell, New Mexico. And his father was working there. They came back to Elmhurst for a short time, and then the family decided to move 90 miles to Rockford. So that's how they ended up here. We're gonna go see where they moved to when they came to town, what they did for a living, and see all that. But he told a great story about why he liked the checkerboards on his guitars. And he said that it actually came from late at night when all the TV shows would go off, you'd get static. And he said it was like watching little bugs, little ants, go crazy on the TV. And ever since that, he always liked the idea of the checkerboards, the black and white. And so that's why a lot of his guitars, his most memorable, iconic stuff, is all checkerboard. Now, if you didn't see it, the vlog before this that I was referencing was we went inside this casino and they have the greatest Cheap Trick collection. They have all of Rick NIELSEN's most famous, most expensive guitars, including the one that he bought, his very first Les Paul. He bought a 55 Les Paul in 1965 at a local bookstore for $65. That guitar now is worth several $100,000. So kind of a crazy story here in Rockford. So here's some of Rick's famous checkerboard guitars and pants that he would have custom made for the band. That would be his kind of calling card. And in my video, I didn't notice this. Katie just saw this, so I'm glad that she showed me the back of his Flying V. This whole case right here is all of his early stuff from Rockford when the band was still the Grim Reapers. And he said 1968, they were touring around Wisconsin, even got it open for the Who, which was kind of cool. He said it was the best band he ever played for, but I mentioned that guitar outside, that famous Les Paul gold top that he bought in 1965 for 65 bucks. This is it. Bought it at a place called the A Bookstore. He said back then, people, if they didn't want stuff, they just traded in for other stuff, and he would always go looking around for it. Before the days of the internet, you actually have to go out and find the guitars. So that is a true piece of history. So if you want to see all of his old classic guitars in his collection, look up my vlog from here, the Rockford Hard Rock. Rockford sounded familiar to you and you love the movie A League of Their Own. The Rockford Peaches was the women's baseball team based out of here. So they have this great mural here in Midtown, and we're gonna show you one of Rick's haunts a couple of minutes from here. So believe it or not, it is still here all the way back from the early 50s when Rick's family came back from Roswell, New Mexico. They went to Elmhurst, he said, and then came here to start their life in Rockford and lived here. It was called the Flying Saucer Motel at the time, and he said that they lived here for 3 months, and it just kind of tied into his whole wacky personality. He said anytime there's anything goofy or strange or weird, he's got to be a part of it, and so it's just only fitting that he would make his first home here in Rockford at the Flying Saucer. He said they lived here for 3 months, and then his parents ended up buying a home and ran a music store here in town. So we don't know which place it would have been in here, but this, it's still here. Sunset Motel is what it's called now. Katie and I had to see this just because we found this great interview of Rick talking about his time here. So they even have an old phone booth. Kind of shows a little bit of the age. There it is, former Flying Saucer Motel. Now let's go over and see where Rick spent a lot of his time, which was the family music store. Got that old town feel. I love it. Their store was on 7th Street. So from what I could see online, it started here where the lower part of the building is, and they had this whole section right here, Ralph Nielsen Music. So Rick said his parents ran a music store that sold organs, pianos. They also taught lessons, and they would have big name people that had like written music books would come and do different demonstrations here. So he said that his mom and dad were both opera singers, and so he was raised with really good music in his life. He said that his father was the best musician, the smartest musician he ever met, and that's considering that Rick called Sir George Martin a close friend and was even his interpreter on one of his tours. He said even beyond George Martin, his father was a better musician. He said the problem was that my dad sang opera and that he loved to sing religious gospel music. So he did sing for Billy Graham in Chicago, but he said most of the time what he would do is he was traveling around, he was singing, he was buying things to stock the store. And so Rick said it's pretty interesting. He started learning drums here when he was 6 years old. And he said that he tried to form a band and formed it in junior high, and that he noticed that all the musicians that he was playing with would play things wrong. And since he grew up in a family that was very musical, he said it really bothered him when he heard things that were wrong. So he said one day they were playing in junior high trying to form a band, and he was actually the drummer. And he said that they were getting so many wrong notes. He said, I didn't know how to play guitar, but I knew what notes should be right. So I just started picking up a guitar and started playing it. So he ended up changing from being a drummer to being a guitar player. And he was really, really into Melody Maker magazine that came out of London. And so he would get the magazine. Then he said his mom would go buy music boxes in Europe, and all the stuff that he would read about wouldn't come out in the US, like Jimi Hendrix or whatever, until 6 months later. So when she would go over to Europe to buy music boxes, he'd give her a list of stuff that he wanted her to buy, and that's how he got into the really good music. And said basically from the time he saw the Beatles on, all he wanted to do was play that kind of music. So he said the first thing when he started playing guitar, he loved the Ventures because they were an all guitar group. So he learned that way right away, but then he became obsessed with Jeff Beck. Now Rick was always an outcast, and so he said junior high, high school and everything, he was, you know, they always thought he was weird, and he even got thrown out of the band. Not his band in junior high, but like thrown out of band class. So he said he always had that love for music and was getting super into the British invasion. So while he was in high school, he would actually get a plane ticket and fly to Cleveland to see his favorite guitar player, Jeff Beck. Now he said, I had seen him in 1965, he said, and he saw him with the Yardbirds, and he was just blown away. But he said when he was in high school, Jeff came back through with the Jeff Beck group, which had Rod Stewart and Ronnie Lane in it, and he said they weren't coming to my town, so I had to go to them. So he said one day, you know, I just decided I'm gonna fly to Cleveland, see this show. There were only 8 people at the whole show, and he said I'm just sitting here with my mind blown, not knowing like what I just seen. I was just so flabbergasted. He goes, and then I have to think about, I gotta go to school tomorrow. And now we're 2 blocks up. We actually realized that the family owned all 3 of those buildings that we just showed you, and that was Nielsen Music and Nielsen Pianos and Organs. But this, 2 blocks up at 216, it says this was actually the location of the music box store that his mom would go buy all those music boxes. So it would have originally been here, and we found an old photo where they would have had like a point and everything in the sign up here. And you can see that even though all the windows and everything are boarded up from this section, that would have definitely had the windows. So this would have been where his mom's shop was. Now Rick's first serious endeavor was his band that he was putting together right at the end of high school, which was called the Grim Reapers. And the first thing that I could find of the Grim Reapers was in 1967. They were on the poster to perform at what would have been Otis Redding's last show. They were there and Otis was trying to make the show. So you can find the Grim Reapers there, but he also said that they started touring. He said how they would get gigs was that all the clubs wanted to book bands that played top 40 music, like pop hits. So he said, we told them that's what we played, but then when we showed up, we would play all the B-sides from those records that nobody knew, and we were playing them so much, I started thinking, hey, I can write songs as good as these horrible songs. So he said, that's what I did, and for the last 50 years, I've just been, you know, trying to write songs as bad as those were, and I've been successful. But he had a crazy path to get to Cheap Trick.
Well, Grim Reaper started as Rick's project, and after a little while he just got to a point where I think they needed something new. So he approached another band local to the area called Toast and Jam, and that's how he ended up meeting Tom Peterson. And it was kind of through touring and things like that along the way that they formed the band Fuse, which was kind of an experimental sound. They kind of like described it as like psychedelic, and in later years, it's really funny because Rick honestly does not seem very proud of what they did with it, but it was kind of just by serendipity that they ended up meeting together and they liked the sound that they were making, and ultimately Fuse went into Europe and were touring. They
came back here, and Rick said that they were living in Philadelphia for a while, and then they had another band. What was it called?
Sick Man of Europe.
So Sick Man of Europe.
Yes.
And Bunny Carlos joined Sick Man of Europe.
Yes.
So then they were playing shows as that, and I guess they broke up, and since they had some shows booked, Bunny and Rick put together another band to fulfill their obligations, and then they started changing the name and eventually played their first show as Cheap Trick, and we're going to go over and see where they did that.
Absolutely.
So right on North Main Street, as you're driving through North Main Street, you'll see this beautiful Veterans Memorial, this big mural here honoring our troops, and it's actually inside this building where Cheap Trick played their first show. So in 1973, the guys that were once known as the Fuse had changed their name to several different things. Rick went on a whole laundry list of things that they called each other, but at one point they were the Reapers, and then they were Cinnamon Cider or Cinnamon Cinder, and they added two members. It was Rick Nielsen and Bunny Carlos, but it was Randy Zeno Hogan and Rick Says Luca, and they were playing shows here throughout 73 and 74, but it was actually apparently at the end of 1974. The band had went through so many name changes, none of the bookers liked their names, and apparently Tom Peterson had went to a Slade show and came back and said they used every Cheap Trick in the book. So they decided to change their name to Cheap Trick and played a New Year's show here with Robin Zander. Now apparently Robin Zander had been a folk artist and Bunny Carlos had played with him.
Minneapolis-based band comes rolling up in a giant white limousine and basically offered him, say, hey, you want to be part of our band? And he looks down, he sees what's around him, and it's like, hey, why not? And the rest is history.
Yeah, he said basically they offered him $250 a week. They showed up with a white limo, and they were a glam band, and he just thought they had more potential than the guys in Cheap Trick. But it's funny because Randy Zeno Hogan is still alive, still plays shows, and if you go to his website, one of the first things that you see is that he calls himself a member of Cheap Trick.
Exactly.
But then the four that we knew, Tom Peterson came back into the band and it became the four that we knew. They played this show here, so we're gonna go in and check out and see what it looks like now.
Yep, let's do it.
Now it's the Rockford Billiard Cafe, but at the time it's called the Stardust. You can definitely tell how this would have been laid out as a venue. I mean, it's very big open spaces. There's the back wall, so wow, pretty cool. The Great Cheap Trick. We don't know how it would have been set up in New Year's of 1974, but you can see, I mean, it seems like it would have probably been the same way with the bar here. We came in the back door, but there's a front door up there. They probably would have had the stage over here. They definitely would not have had it going long lengthwise of the room, so pretty cool. Now we wanted to also share with you, we're going to take a bit of a drive, but the band had to play for a couple of years before anybody would take them seriously, and then when they got discovered, it was kind of by accident. So we're going to take you to where they got discovered and signed and how that all happened. Pretty cool. I've been a Cheap Trick fan ever since I heard Surrender, so to get to see where it all started is pretty freaking cool to me. We have made it to Waukesha, Wisconsin, and our legendary story for Cheap Trick's rise to fame happened at the Sunset Bowl. Katie and I ended up getting out here in the evening, but that's when it all happened. Apparently, 1976, the man who discovered Aerosmith, Jack Douglas, was out here visiting family members in Waukesha, and he said he had heard of Cheap Trick before, but he had never seen them, and he said he was here visiting family, and his brother, who normally had really bad taste in music, said, hey, you gotta come out and check out this band. They are great. Now he said, I was apprehensive originally because my brother had such bad taste in music, but he said, again, they had, you know, I'd heard people talk about him and everything, so he said, I come out here and I see this, and he said, the place was packed to the rafters, and he said, I saw Cheap Trick play. It would have been 1976. He said it was part carnival, part like amusement park, and part rock and roll show. And he said that this place was totally packed. He said they were doing the whole weekend. And he said after the show, I went out, and he said they had a little tour bus, like this little mini tour bus they'd been playing shows with, and I told them, I'm gonna get you guys a deal. And they said, all right, sounds good to us. So he said they were actually playing this venue for an entire weekend. He said back then you would do like a Thursday through Sunday gig, and they were so popular they were selling out nights. So he said, I told him I was gonna make a phone call, and he said I called the head of Epic Records, A&R, and I said, get out here and sign this band this weekend or I'm taking them to RCA. And that's what happened. Epic Records signed them. They immediately got him into the studio, and Jack Douglas produced their first record, put it out, and it wasn't an immediate hit in the US, but it was big in Japan. And Rick Nielsen said later that he said, I actually really wanted to ask John Lennon to produce our first record, but he said, you know, I knew John Lennon had already retired and everything, and Jack Douglas was going to do it, but years later, 1979-80, John Lennon was working on the Double Fantasy sessions and asked Bunny Carlos and Rick Nielsen to come out and work with him. And Rick said, I went out there with Jack Douglas because Jack was working on the record also. And I told John, God, I always wanted you to produce our first record. And John said, I would have if you'd asked. I would have loved to have. And he said, I couldn't believe I said that right in front of Jack Douglas, and just told him like I would have rather had John Lennon produce our record, but this is where it all happened. So we're gonna go and take a look. It was Sunset Bowl, and it was actually a bowling alley then. It's a bowling alley now. It's an old school bowling alley, that's for sure. Probably played right in here, wouldn't you think? Because the bowling alley would have still been here even then. That bowling alley's on the other side of that wall, so pretty freaking cool, man. Wow. I can only imagine Rick Nielsen, 1976. Jack Douglas said the reason he wanted to sign them was, you know, they were high energy and everything, but he said they reminded me of the Beatles. So they didn't sound like the Beatles, but they had the originality. It was there even then, and I could tell that the great songwriting, you know, Robin Zander, great frontman, great singer, and so that was the legend. Aerosmith and Cheap Trick would end up since they were, you know, basically both working with Jack Douglas, would become great friends and tour together and have a history linked together for a long, long time. Jack Douglas also produced the Live at Budokan, and Rick Nielsen said that was a total accident. He said that was supposed to just be like, because they did well in Japan, that was going to be like a fan club record, and the single took off. I Want You to Want Me. So Jack was responsible for both of those. How cool, huh?
This is amazing.
I know it's just like a bowling alley, but you and I are such big Cheap Trick fans, and we're even going to meet Rick Nielsen pretty soon. So this is pretty cool to see where they got signed by the great Jack Douglas.
Exactly.
I mean, just amazing.
I mean, we're in the middle of the Midwest. This is just bizarre and amazing that such a cool thing happened right here.
And this is the home, this was like where Les Paul made his name, who Rick would love his guitar, so Les Paul's actually buried here in town. Yeah, there's the bar area, so I bet that they probably would have played right over here where the pool tables are and everything. So we talked to someone that worked here, and she said that they did in fact used to set up a stage over where we showed you, but she said also her dad used to play in a band here, and she said where their game room is here also used to be a banquet hall, so they could have performed in here. So we'll take a look. Without having Rick Nielsen or Robin Zander here, we're gonna have to take some guesses. Yeah, this totally, definitely could have been it. This was big enough. This could have been the side. It wouldn't have disturbed any of the bowlers or anything. Yeah, this definitely could have been the room. We would have had no idea if someone that worked here didn't have a family history, so that kind of helps. Very cool. They had no idea either when we said, do you guys have anything that commemorates Cheap Trick being signed here? And they're like, wow, no, we don't. Probably the people that used to work here back then knew more about it, but yep, the historic Sunset Bowl. I'm happy. Rick Nielsen might have called his mom on that payphone. We don't know. Well, friends, I hope you guys enjoyed our day. We love Cheap Trick, and I hope that this was kind of cool to see their very, very humble beginnings. They were just like us, just like I used to have a band, and I used to play Grange Hall, so it's so cool to see that they were signed out of a bowling alley. Legendary band going 50 years plus. The good guys of rock and roll. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time. Have a great night, and goodbye.